Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Tim Loudon, and I'm the program manager of the Digital Analytics program. We are very excited to bring you a webinar today on in the DAP Learning series on using Google Search Console. The presentation will be led today by my wonderful colleague. Whoop, I think we have a little bit of reverb. Okay. Presentation will be led today by my wonderful colleague, Freddie Blicker, and we have a special guest with us, Mary Beth Murphy from the USA Gov team, to tell us a little bit more about how they use Search Console. So a few things to note before we get kicked off. Number one, I will be monitoring the chat section. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to put them in the chat, and I will try to answer them there or bring them up at the end Q&A session. And as well, as always, we will be sending out our slides to you, and you will receive a survey after this with resources, the slides, and a survey. And we really encourage you to fill out that survey because it helps us make sure that we're delivering content that is valuable to you. With that, I think we have a lot of stuff to cover today, so I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Freddie.
Great, thank you, Tim. Welcome, everyone. We're really excited to be presenting to you on using Google Search Console. So we've got a lot of material to cover, so let's dive right in. Today's agenda. So by the end of this webcast, you're going to be able to understand what is Google Search Console. We're going to talk about why you can't integrate Google Search Console with DAP. We're going to talk about how to integrate Google Search Console with your independent Google Analytics implementation and how you can leverage it to create really useful reporting to understand your site health. We're also going to walk through some of the more useful site health features that you can use to better understand how Google is crawling, consuming, indexing, and ranking your site in search results. So let's jump in. So first off, what is organic search? Well, I'm sure everyone on today's webcast knows how to go to Google and to search on Google. Organic search is simply the terminology used to describe that process. It's when a user enters a search term into a search engine to find answers or discover useful content. So organic search comes from many search engines. There's Bing, Yahoo, Google, etc. But 90% of all government-wide organic search comes from Google. So keep that in mind as we go through this content. One thing I do want to point out, there is a practice of search engine optimization, and that is simply a practice whereby you modify certain metadata, website code, sitemaps, etc., to ensure that Google knows how to crawl your website, consume the content, and then display it in a search result, like we have here on the right-hand side of your screen for the GSA. So we'll be referring to search engine optimization a little bit later in some of our content. Okay, so for today's webcast, we're going to be speaking about Google Search Console. Google Search Console is a tool that's built by Google, specific to Google.com. It's developed to help any website owner comply with website best practices so that you're able to better appear in Google's organic search results. So Google Search Console is a tool that you use to optimize your site. So this is an important tool set for when you work on your search engine optimization of your website. Now, think of the tool as a guide on how to adhere to website best practices and comply with Google so that your content appears higher in search engine results. That's the ultimate goal here, making sure that your site is healthy and also appears high in search results so that your users can find the content that you're creating. So why is organic search important? Well, in May, government-wide, organic search accounted for 46% of all traffic. So that's a ton of traffic. This is 46% across all government websites came from organic search. And 90% of that is from Google alone. So imagine, what would you do if people couldn't find your site on Google or on other search engines? that traffic just wouldn't appear. You just wouldn't have that traffic coming to your website anymore. So think about it this way. What would all of your hard work in your website mean if people couldn't find it in search engines or in Google? And if people can't find your site, then how is your website helping your agency's mission? So today we're going to talk about how you leverage Google Search Console to ensure that this doesn't happen. Now, this is a very important tool that all websites need to be using. So this is not a question of whether or not you should or should not use it. This is a question of how you use it. So another way to think about this is organic search is your most important traffic driver for your users to find your site. Organic search in our DAP data is the most important traffic driver for every website out there. It dwarfs email, paid search, social media. So this is why it's so important that you leverage Google Search Console to make sure that you're complying with Google's website best practices so that Google knows how to interpret your content and how to present it to the rest of the world in their search engine results. Now, another way to think about this is Google Search is free and powerful. Google does all of the crawling and all of the hard work up front on your website and then is presenting it to the world in their search results. So it's a super powerful tool that needs to be leveraged if you want to continue having consistent traffic to your website. Now, how does this all tie into Search Console? Well, while Google does all of this upfront work of finding, crawling, and indexing your content, you also need to meet them halfway and do your part. And that part is using Google Search Console to manage your site, to adhere to website best practices, so Google knows how to find and understand the relevancy of your content. You need to use it to monitor your site for crawl errors, for 404s, for content that has disappeared. All of these things, they can get very technical. All of these things influence how Google views the relevancy of your site and whether or not they think something shady is going on with your site, either due to redirect chains or 404s or server errors. All of this influences Google's interpretation and your reputation in the eyes of Google. So this is really important. Now, if you don't adhere to website best practices, you are at risk of degrading or even losing your 46% organic search traffic from Google. So this is a pretty big challenge for sites that do lose organic search traffic. And it does happen. There have been some very high profile cases where Google has delisted websites for either shady practices or websites not following best practices. So Google Search Console is really the tool to be understanding your website health. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper into Google Search Console and what it actually does. So, high level, with Google Search Console, you can monitor server errors, missing content. This all influences how Google crawls, how it's able to find content. It's a tool that monitors and any type of content that has been crawled and indexed, so you can better understand what Google has crawled and indexed. And then by using that, you can infer what is showing up in search engine results. Leveraging Google Search Console helps you provide Google with a roadmap to their Googlebot crawlers for which content is most important to crawl and which content, in theory, should be ranked by submitting your sitemaps in robots.txt. Now, ultimately, how Google interprets that is up to Google, but you need to be complying with best practices to ensure that they have all the information and that they have the roadmap to know that, yes, this is your content, this is the important stuff, and this needs to be crawled and presented. Google Search Console can also help you monitor your search engine visibility for certain keywords that people are typing into Google, for how your landing pages are appearing in search engine results. how all of your site pages are ranking. This is really important stuff. So here are a couple examples of questions that you could answer with Google Search Console. For example, you could better understand which keyword queries caused your site to appear in search results. You could understand, did some keyword queries result in more traffic to your site than others? Which sites are linking to your website? Is your mobile site performing well for visitors searching on mobile? And you could ask many more questions. It's a really powerful tool to start to analyze and get to the bottom of these larger strategic questions about how your website is set up and how you're optimizing it so that Google knows how to rank it. Okay, before we jump into Google Search Console and Google Analytics, I want to show you what Google Search Console looks like. Now, we'll jump into how you integrate it, how you set it up in just a bit. But just want to give you a quick high-level view of what this looks like. Now, right now, I am in USA.gov's Google Search Console account. You'll see here we have a dashboard. We have messages that Google sends to you if they find any issues with how you've presented content or set up different technologies on your site. We've got a section here for understanding your organic search appearance, search traffic analytics, the Google index, crawling, any security issues, like if malware is being hosted on your site, and then other web tools. So this is just kind of a preview of what we're going to be talking about in later slides. Okay, so let's talk about Google Search Console and Google Analytics. Now, just to back up a little bit and talk about why we would want to connect Google Search Console and Google Analytics. Well, back in 2014, Google switched to the HTTPS protocol. Now, the result in Google Analytics was that because of HTTPS, Google was no longer able or willing to show you organic search keywords coming to your website in Google Analytics. And in fact, if you go into your website account and you look in acquisition, organic keywords, you will see as the #1 keyword here, not provided. Now, in this particular view of this data, this represents 99% of all organic search keywords is now labeled as not provided. That is because of Google switching to HTTPS protocol in 2014. Now, the only way to understand your organic search keywords is through Google Search Console. So that is why it's very important to use Google Search Console to understand the exact keyword queries that users are searching for in Google search results. Now, Google has enabled you to integrate Google Search Console with your Google Analytics implementation so that you can see these organic keywords. You have the option in Search Console of seeing those keywords, but you can also integrate it with Google Search Console so that you have the ability to report on these keywords. Now, you'll see here on the screen, I'm still under acquisition, but now I'm under Search Console. You go down to queries. You can now see a rolling 90 days of actual keywords from Google Search Console in your Google Analytics reporting. They give you clicks, impressions, click-through rate, and average ranking position as well. So how would you use this? Well, you would use this to understand how users in Google search are, #1, what they're typing for, and then #2, how many times they're appearing in search results, how many clicks to those search results people are actually making, what that click-through rate is calculated to, and then what the ranking position actually was for your site for these particular keywords. So this is super powerful stuff in helping you better understand how your website is performing in Google search results. Now, one thing to note here, with Google Search Console, the console data is not compatible with traditional Google Analytics segments. So because it's a separate integration, you don't have access to secondary dimensions to overlay by keyword with your kind of typical secondary dimensions that you would expect to see here. So that's one challenge, but that doesn't mean it's not a useful data set. You could still query the data using device type, which is important, understanding engagement on different mobile devices. So it's a really valuable data set in understanding what keywords are important to your users. And then based on those keywords that are important to your users, what type of content do you need to create to cater to that search intent? How you need to optimize your metadata for your page title, your meta description, etc. Okay, so I just displayed what the reporting looks like. Let's talk about how you integrate it, GSC, with Google Analytics. But before we do that, one caveat. Now, everyone on the call likely knows that the DAP Google Analytics contains 5,000 websites. Now, you cannot integrate your individual site's Google Search Console with DAP. Now, why is that? Well, GSC is set up for one site. DAP Google Analytics contains 5,000 sites. So let's use an example. Let's say the GSA came to us with their Google Search Console for gsa.gov. Let's say they wanted to integrate that specific Google Search Console with DAP. Well, what would happen? Well, all of the GSA's keyword data from organic search would populate to every agency and every website's reports. So if you were looking at the DoD's website, you would see in the organic search keyword report, keywords from organic search to gsa.gov. So obviously that is not useful to the DAP community. And so that is why you cannot integrate Google Search Console with DAP. So let's talk about how you set up Google Search Console first, and then we'll talk about how you connect it to your free independently managed Google Analytics account. So we've got a handy dandy little link in here for how to reach Google Search Console. I've got a couple screenshots here about what this is going to look like. So when you first sign up for Google Search Console, it's going to ask you which website you want to add as a property to Google Search Console. You're going to enter your website in there. So if it's gsa.gov, you'll put gsa.gov in there. Then you're going to have to verify that you actually own this site. Now, there's a recommended method where you can upload a file, but there are other alternate methods that you can use. One is using your Google Analytics account. If you're using Google Tag Manager, you can also verify it with your GTM account. So it's pretty quick, it's pretty easy. And then once you have set it up, you will see a screen like you see here. Now, granted, it's not going to have any data, but it's going to start collecting data, and you'll be able to monitor this on a regular basis. And I do recommend monitoring this on a weekly basis to understand your site health. Okay, so let's talk about how to integrate this with Google Analytics. So you'll recall earlier I mentioned you can't integrate this with DAP. Now, most government websites either have a free version or an independently managed free version with separate data, or an independently managed free version of Google Analytics with DAP data, and that's using a PUA. If anyone has questions on using a PUA, we do have DAP implementation instructions that we can send you. So feel free to contact us with any questions on that. In both of these cases, you can integrate your Google Search Console with an independently managed free Google Analytics account. Now, to integrate Google Search Console, you would go to your analytics account and you would go to the property that you want to integrate it with. You go to property settings, and then you would select Search Console. Now, here is a screenshot of what this is going to look like. You'll see here, property is Google Merchandise Store. This is Google's test account. You go to property settings, and then you would see this little section called Search Console. This is where you would integrate. And Google Analytics will prompt you on how to do that. So it's pretty straightforward. Okay, let's talk about some of the more useful features from Google Search Console. So out of the box, in Google Search Console, you get a rolling 90 days of data. So any of these reports here that have any data in them, you get 90 days. You get to see your site's visibility and search results. You get to see the actual keywords, your content rankings, how the content is indexed, how Google crawls your site, how it consumes the sitemaps, interprets the robots.txt, all these things that influence search results. These are all website best practices. And you can use this data to determine how to optimize your site to improve your appearance in search results. So that's the really cool thing about Google Search Console. Now, I want to speak a little bit more about a search result because I realize this may be kind of an arcane concept to what influences a search result. Now, within Google Search Console, they give an example of this specific search result and the different types of elements that influence how your website appears in search results. So Google has this funny cat pictures example. Now you'll notice here for funny cat pictures with captions, this is driven by the page title that you have in your HTML. The URL, it's pretty self-explanatory. Keyword rich, uses cat captions to describe funny cat pictures. Rich snippet drives the description here, or it could be your meta description in your HTML, and so on. There's all these different types of concepts that exist in terms of website best practices and search engine optimization that you can dive deeper into and dig into what is appropriate for your site and what types of information you're trying to bubble up. So what influences search engine optimization? Well, high level, it's the keyword consideration set that you're targeting. This is otherwise known as search demand. Now, these are the keywords that you can get out of Search Console to know what your users are searching for on Google. Some other on-site things that I've already mentioned: page title, meta description, H1, the body copy that you use in your HTML, a friendly URL structure, your top level and left-hand navigation, including specific keywords or specific links to pages that are most important to you to ranking in search results. Even internal linking, how you link to other pages within your website influences how Google is able to crawl and find that content. Your sitemaps, these are required. You need sitemaps. You need a robots.txt file to provide directives to Google and Google's crawlers. And then you need to be aware of any type of website coding that prevents Googlebot from crawling your site. So this could be some weird iframes or some fancy JavaScript or Ajax that may prevent a crawler from actually accessing and seeing your content. I worked on a site a couple years ago where the product manager decided to use a certain web technology that made the site invisible to Google on mobile devices. That was bad. That was risking almost $20 million by not appearing in search results. So you can start to understand there's a lot that goes into this and a lot that influences search engine optimization. And you need to be aware of these things from a best practices perspective. Okay, so let's dive into Google Search Console itself. So I showed you the dashboard before. We've got dashboard messages, all of these sections here. So let's go through high level what these all mean. We're not going to do a super deep dive on what this is because these are pretty complex concepts, and you need to work with somebody on your team or perhaps with a developer who has experience doing this type of thing. But high level, let's talk about structured data. This is simply micro data about your content and encoding your HTML and that content so that Google knows that this is specific content. So for example, let's say you have a book or a white paper. You could encode that with specific structured data, otherwise known as schema, to ensure that Google knows how to interpret that. Using these different concepts here will enable Google to better understand your content so that perhaps they will rank your content higher in search results. Rich cards. These are simply cards that are presented to you in search results. One good example that I like is when you type in something with recipes, you'll see these little colorful cards that pop up in like a little carousel. If you have things that you want to appear there, you could potentially use rich cards. Data highlighter. This is simply a way to tag data on your site to highlight this content in the search results. Now, I do want to call out one of the most important reports here is HTML improvements. If there's one report that you're going to look in here under search appearance, you want to look at HTML improvements. This is what Google sees on your site. This is Google crawling your site and basically telling you, hey, we, Google, have identified duplicate content and duplicate metadata, like page titles or descriptions on your site. You need to fix this. So this is a super important part of this search appearance section. Accelerated mobile pages, this is optional. This is simply if you're looking into how do you better optimize your site for mobile. There's a concept called AMP. We're not going to be talking about that. We don't recommend you do one way or the other. This is just an option. It's really up to what you're trying to achieve on your website and how you want to do that. So really the search appearance section here overall is to help Google understand your content and how it appears in search results. Okay, let's talk about the search traffic section of Google Search Console. Now, the first section here is search analytics. This is another super important report that you need to look at in here. This is where you understand keyword rankings and search intent. Now, I want to show you that really quickly. And I highly recommend everyone on this call, when you get a chance, set up Google Search Console and just go in and play with the data, see what's available. Now, in Search Analytics, it gives you queries. These are the keywords. You can see here in this particular account, you can see that there are a number of people clicking on search results ranking for change of address 48,000 times over the last 28 days. This is for USA.gov. You can start to segment the data and understand ranking position for this keyword. So this is, for change of address, USA.gov ranks #1. So that's why it's getting so many clicks, is because it's the first search result on the page. So you could even look at device type, right? There's a lot of different ways to slice and dice your data here. So it's a really super powerful tool. Okay, links to your site. This is where you can understand which external sites link to your site. Now, this is more of an SEO-related concept. Links to your site are considered votes about the authority of your content in the eyes of Google. I've seen sites and worked on sites where there were spammy links pointing to my site. And Google notified us that, hey, you need to remove these spammy links. Otherwise, we may remove you from part of the index. So you need to be aware of these potentially spammy links that are pointing to your site. Internal links. I mentioned before, internal links are an important factor in SEO. They provide a roadmap for Googlebot's crawlers to find your content. So understanding which content you link to the most is important. You do that here in internal links. Manual actions. This is where Google will communicate to you if they are giving you any penalties for potentially bad website practices. There are sites out there that unintentionally implement code that Google doesn't like, that doesn't follow best website practices. And if Google interprets it as something spammy or some type of trick, they could potentially levy a manual action against you and hurt your search visibility. So this is where you need to be aware of and monitoring this on a regular basis. If you have more of an international audience, perhaps state.gov, and you're interested about more global search engines, you could optimize, in theory, your site for an international audience. And then finally, mobile usability. This is a great tool to use to understand where your website sits in terms of mobile usability and what types of improvements you could make. So there's a lot of material here, but the big takeaway here is the search traffic section of Google Search Console is geared towards helping you understand how your site appears in Google search results from a ranking perspective, looking at your keywords, external site links, penalties for non-compliance, etc. Okay, let's talk about the two major final sections of Google Search Console that are really important. Let's talk about Google Index and Crawl. Okay, so if you go into Google Index, you can look at your index status. This is simply telling you the overall index health and any blocked pages. So for example, I could go in here in this account and look at, for USA.gov, there are 1,000 pages indexed. If there were any blocked pages, you could see those there too. Now, why is this important? Well, you want to make sure that you're not blocking important pages that you need to get traffic. So let's say in your robots.txt file, you give Google a directive to not crawl certain directories. Let's say your web developer accidentally added a very important directory to the robots.txt file. Well, you could be blocking that and not even realize it. The only way you'd realize it is by going into index status and understanding the index health of your website. So super important concept that I recommend everyone dig into after this call. The other piece, I've mentioned Googlebot and crawlers, right? Google is constantly crawling websites, looking for errors, looking for content, new content. Under the crawl section, this is where you understand your crawl errors. This is where you submit sitemaps. This is where you test your robots.txt file. Let's take a quick look at that. So here, there's some soft 404s, there's some not found content. You can understand crawl rate, your highs and your lows, your averages on pages crawled per day, and so on. So super important. Now, one thing to note, there are a number of government websites out there that do not submit sitemaps on a regular basis. You need to submit sitemaps. This is where you do it. You submit sitemaps through Google Search Console. If you don't, Google does not know that you perhaps have this whole new directory, right? So all of these things work together. SEO best practices, website best practices, sitemaps, as well as a robots.txt. These are all website best practices. And Google Search Console is the tool to help you identify those. So big takeaway here, use this section to understand overall indexation, crawl errors, and submit your sitemaps. Okay, so let's walk through a couple quick examples on how to look at Google Search Console data in both Google Analytics and in Google Search Console. Okay, so let's do Google Analytics first. So let's say I want to understand which organic search queries happen on mobile and tablet devices. Now, if some of you at home follow along what happens in the world of SEO, you'll know that Google has recently switched to a mobile first index. So they are looking at how your mobile website performs in search results, and that will influence how they rank your desktop site. Now, in this particular view of data, I'm in Google Analytics, and I am looking at the Search Console integration. So USA.gov has already integrated here, and I am looking at queries. So these are the keywords that people are searching for on Google, and this is coming directly from Search Console. So Search Console data is the only way that you can get the actual organic search queries integrated with Google Analytics reporting. Now, you'll see here, there's unclaimed money, change of address, etc. I've overlaid a secondary dimension of device category. Now, as many DAP users on this call today know, you can use a filter. You can use some regex, and I've said, show me only mobile or tablet. And that is what I've done. And now you can start to manipulate the data to see how unclaimed money appears on mobile versus on tablet. Now you've got a ton of data here, so you're gonna probably have to export this into a CSV in Excel or use Tableau or Google Data Studio to kind of sift through it. But you can start to infer and understand certain trends about search data and how potentially you need to optimize your website for not only desktop, but also mobile and tablet devices, because those are different search paradigms. Now, the other cool thing, you can look at landing page. So organic search sends traffic, which lands on pages on your site. Under Search Console, there's a landing pages section. You can go in here and understand how many impressions USA.gov/post office received in Google search results. You can understand all of this search visibility data, including rank. And then it's integrated with page level data from Google Analytics, sessions, bounce rate, etc. You can understand the whole kind of journey through this one landing page, from visibility and average rank position all the way through to sessions and bounce rate. Really powerful stuff. Okay, in Google Search Console, let's look at an example. So let's say I'm trying to figure out which queries, so these are the keywords that people are searching for on Google, which queries caused your site to appear in search results, and how is your site actually ranking for these keywords? Well, how I would answer that in Search Console is I would go in here, I would go to Search Analytics. Remember, this is the report I said was really important. I'm going to choose Queries, and then I have a list of queries here, right? Got a ton of data here. I've got 1,000 rows of data, all different keywords. I've got the average click-through rate, the average ranking position in the search results on Google. And I'm able to toggle here and check off impressions or click-through rate or position, whatever I want to do to answer whatever business question I'm trying to answer, I can do in here. Okay. So let's say you want to understand the ranking of this keyword. So let's choose Social Security. So I've got 577,000 impressions for this particular keyword. There's a 0.72 click-through rate. On average, the rank is 6.7, so you're still on the first page of search results in Google. So how do I better kind of toggle through this data? Let's click through and let's see what happens. So I'm going to click on Social Security, and it kind of breaks it down for you here. And what you can do from here is you can then toggle to pages. And after it loads, you could see all the pages here on USA.gov that have received traffic from Google search results. So one can infer from this first page here that this appeared in a search result in Google search. It received the most impressions out of everything for that keyword Social Security. It had a somewhat high click-through rate, not as high as this other URL, and it ranked on average 6.7. So that is how you interpret this data. And by using keyword plus the landing page, you can start to figure out, okay, which page do I want to rank for which particular keyword? And you can start to differentiate between which pages perform better in organic search results in terms of rank and click-through rate. So really powerful stuff. There's a lot of data in this tool. We can't tell you how to use that data. It all depends on the business questions that you're trying to answer and how you're trying to leverage the tool to influence your organic search rankings and visibility. And with that, I am going to kick it over to Mary Beth for USA.gov. Mary Beth?
Hi, thanks so much, Freddie. Wow, that was a lot of great information that we can probably use going forward. So I'm going to talk a little bit about USA.gov and how we use the Google Search Console because search data is very important to us. We get about 69% of our traffic from organic search, which is a huge percentage. And up until a few months ago, we were going directly into the Search Console to pull our data. And so we would download the top 1,000 terms and kind of use those. But starting in January, we decided to make that connection with Google Analytics. So connecting the Search Console as you showed. And there's definitely been some benefits to this. And I would say the main benefit is that just we can access more data. So in the Search Console, you're limited to the top 1,000 queries. And that's whether you're searching by 1 day or 30 days or 90 days. But in Google Analytics, we've been pulling 25,000 queries a month, which is a lot of data, and that can present a little bit of a data management challenge. But it's good to have more data, and it helps us kind of do more than scratch the surface of just the most popular terms. Another benefit is, as you mentioned, Freddie, we can look at queries by page. So if we're interested in editing content on a particular page, we can take a look and see what were the queries, what was the click-through rate, what are the most popular terms, and that sort of thing. We can also, as you said, the access to secondary dimensions in Google Analytics connected with the Search Console is limited, but you can look at specific things like device use in case it's important to you to see which terms were searched on mobile versus desktop and that sort of thing. And then finally, it's just convenient to be able to get your data while you're in Google Analytics, which probably most of us use for looking at our traffic and other things. And it's a familiar tool. So that's pretty helpful too. So we put our queries, after we've collected those 25,000 queries a month, we put them into categories and subcategories to help us figure out what words people are using when they search. And then that kind of impacts what words we use on the content on our pages and in our metadata. And we're also looking at the magnitude of searches so that we can figure out, what's most popular, and therefore kind of where should we direct our time, because resources are limited and we can't focus on everything. So if there are particular topics that are bringing in the most traffic and the most searches, we may spend more time focusing on those. So the process that we undertake is on a monthly basis, we go into Google Analytics, we pull those queries, about 25,000 a month, and then we store them in Excel. And then at that point, we use Tableau to identify what terms are new. So we've been doing this a while, so we have a lot of terms already categorized, but there's always new terms, lots of variations in how people are spelling things, what phrasing they're using, adding extra spaces and that sort of thing. So we then go into Access and use Access to categorize those terms. And then we go back to Tableau to help us view the data. So here's an example of a worksheet in Tableau, and this doesn't show the actual queries. This one just shows the categories that we've used. In this case, we're looking at immigration, citizenship, and visitors to the US. And there's a lot of queries on this, so we have a lot of categories on it. And along the right, you can see the filters that we use to we can look at filter, we can look by month, we can narrow it down to a specific subject that we want to look at. And now here, this shows a little deeper. This actually shows the query terms in the category of becoming a US citizen. So you can see there's lots of variations in how people type this in, lots of people asking in the form of how to. And it just helps us see what are the most popular, how to become a US citizen was the most popular within this category. And it had also a very high click-through rate, 48%. So this just helps us make decisions about our content, and and we make those recommendations to our content team. Another thing that we look at is not just the Google search data, but also the data that we get from our site search. We use search.gov. That's the tool that we use for our site search. And it's really beneficial to look at this too, because the Google terms are, they're really only going to be terms that are already reflected on our site. They're going to be topics that are already reflected on our site. But looking at our site search helps us to see terms that we might not have thought of. It also helps us to kind of see new topics that might be emerging. So we definitely find that it's helpful to look at both. And I'll go back a slide here. You can see in the Tableau file under channel, we have both our Google search terms and also our search.gov terms in the same file. So that's really helpful too. And the last step we would take before making recommendations to our content team is to look at Google Trends. So we had a term, federal recreation pass, for example, that was being used on a page, and we found that national park pass was actually much more commonly used by people. And so our recommendation based on this would be to advise that we change from using federal recreation pass to national park pass. And then the last thing I wanted to show from the Google Beta Console is that you can actually look at more than just 90 days of data. You can look at the last 16 months. You're still limited to the top 1,000 terms, so it might not be super helpful, but for those who are interested in that, just good to know. And that's all I've got.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary Beth. So just to touch on the last slide that you showed there, some of you may have noticed that when Freddie was giving what was an incredible presentation, thank you, Freddie, it has an option in the current Google Search Console to be able to see the new beta Search Console, which is what Mary Beth just referenced, which is kind of an updated look and feel, and it has a few extra features like going back more than 90 days, which might be beneficial for all of you. So at this point, I want to open it up to questions that you can put in the chat. I am going to relay one that came in earlier, but I want to make a blanket announcement first that if you are watching this webinar and you just watched all that awesome stuff that Mary Beth and the USA Gov team do, and you went, oh my gosh, we don't do anything like that, you are not alone. When they first showed us this information about taking the terms and bringing it into categories and making use of it in the way they do, my jaw dropped. So they are an incredibly advanced team, and they do awesome work. We appreciate Mary Beth coming on and showing us that. But I hope that we can all get there someday, Mary Beth, because you guys are just rock stars. Anyways, moving on to questions. Freddie, the first question I have for you that came in through the chat was, how often should sitemaps be submitted?
Ooh, that's a great question. I would say, you know, looking at how often new content is created will really help you better gauge how often you should be submitting site content, right? Now, it's not just sitemaps that determine or influence your rankings, but let's say you created a whole new directory of content during one quarter. You would want to make sure that you upload new sitemaps that include that new content. So it really varies based on kind of the velocity and the amount of content that you create on a regular basis.
We update ours quarterly, and I just want to say that that's a somewhat new thing. We were for a while under the mistaken impression that that was something that Google did automatically, and that we did that. But we've started updating our sitemap now on a quarterly basis.
Yeah, and one other thing about sitemaps, not only do you need an XML version of sitemaps, but best practice is to also have an HTML version of your sitemaps. So that requires some obviously significant upfront work to make sure that your sitemaps are organized. That is likely probably a whole webcast in and of itself, because there are a lot of things in how you produce sitemaps that you need to be aware of. But we don't necessarily have time to speak to all of that here today. But just know that you need to have an XML and an HTML version of your sitemaps. Great question, though.
Thank you for that answer, Freddie and Mary Beth. I'm waiting to see if any other questions come in. I'm going to give it one last call here on the chat box. And if no one else says anything in the next few seconds, then we can move to close up a few minutes early. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, in that case, know that for any of you that have further questions that maybe you didn't want to pose in front of the group, you are very welcome to email us. Our email address is dap@support.digitalgov.gov. And take a look out for the email that will be following this presentation with the slides, which I think will be very helpful. It was a lot of information, as well as the satisfaction survey, which, again, I really ask that you take the 2 minutes and fill it out. It helps us a lot. This was also being recorded, and it'll be available on the DigitalGov account Analytics YouTube playlist. So to wrap it all up, I just want to give tons of gratitude to both Freddie and Mary Beth for an extremely informative presentation. I know I learned a lot. Very much appreciate you coming on and sharing your stories, and Freddie for all the wonderful explanation you did. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the week, what we have left, and you all have a great weekend. Hope to see you on our next webinar.